Everyone. In this video, I want to talk about unit testing again. Recall that unit testing is the testing of individual hardware or software units or groups of related units. So we're really focusing on small pieces, the method or how methods work together, and maybe the class level. And the tool that we use for that is JUnit. So you can definitely go to the JUnit documentation site where it has a user guide and it explains a lot about what's going on. So let me just show you what that JUnit user guide would look like. So this website just gives you a sense of like what it is, and you can see that JUnit 5 consists of the JUnit platform, JUnit Jupyter, and JUnit Vintage. And so if you're ever stuck, you can definitely go here and it will give you some examples of what it means to write a JUnit test. So here's the example that they have on the website, which is they want to check this assert equals here. There is a ton of stuff on here and different things. We don't use all of these necessarily for our class, but it is useful to have a general sense of what's going on with JUnit. So we've talked before about unit testing and integration testing, and as well as system testing. And these ideas that keep coming up over and over are the requirements, equivalence classes, and boundary value analysis. So even though we're doing this at a very small level, because it's for a single method or maybe just a couple of methods together, you still have to think about these various things when you are writing your tests. Great. So let's talk a little bit more about JUnit. JUnit is an API for automating that unit and integration testing. As I said a little bit earlier, we use JUnit 5, and that uses something called Jupyter, which just means that your imports are going to contain the string Jupyter. And another thing that I'd like you to notice as we go through some of these examples is the test case methods have an @test tag before each test method. Here are a handful of JUnit assertions that are helpful for some primitive data types. So I have assert true, which checks if a condition variable equals true. Assert false, which checks if the condition variable equals false. Assert equals, which takes in an expected and actual and tells you if the expected equals the actual. I have assert equals for char as well. So the int and char assert equals work the same way. And I have assert equals for doubles, which in this case, to check if doubles are equal, we usually have a little bit of floating point precision errors, so we allow this delta. Doubles are special in the sense because they're not going to match up exactly necessarily, so delta lets you specify how close things are. You can also test exceptions. So you can write methods that throw exceptions, and we'll talk about this more, but that provides feedback to the client about maybe the way that they've tried to input things is incorrect. And so it actually tests if the correct exceptions are thrown. So JUnit 5 has test methods specifically for testing exceptions. Let me just show you an example. Let's say you have an exception. It does something, and you can actually do an assert, and it does not throw, or it does throw. Okay. So let's look at a bigger picture. And this is what a JUnit test class would look like. At the very top, something that you have are these import statements. So you have basically this thing that you're going to import. Remember, look, it has the word Jupyter in it because that's the one we're using. And then these things that are inside assertions are the particular things that you can assert. So when I talked about assert equals and those sorts of things, those are what come from this package of assertions. Good. So actually, let's look at the API a little bit more. So I just talked about this junit.jupyter.api.assertions, and these are a bunch of different kinds of assertions that you can have. The ones that I've mentioned before are assert equals, which there's a ton of them. You can have assert false. You can have assert true. So those are some of the ones that I've talked about already. But as you can see, there are a ton of different things that you can assert, different things that you can check in your program. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other important ones here. If you were really eagle-eyed on the previous slide where I showed what the assertions look like, you would notice that the return type of those methods were void. So a test method doesn't return a result. If the test run correctly, a test method basically does nothing. But if a test fails, it says it throws an assertion failed error. The JUnit framework catches the error and deals with it. You are not going to do anything except go back and fix your code. So let's suppose that you've run your tests. So even though it's a little bit funny here, we have Java -jar, and then I have this jar file that I'm going to use, and I'm going to run it on some test program that I've written here. And you'll see that it will actually give you some information about what tests have been successful and what tests have failed. That's where you go back in and figure out, did my program do something wrong? Did I calculate something by hand incorrectly, so my test case is wrong? And basically those are the two things that can happen. So the test case, it have verdicts, right? So the verdict is a result of executing that test case. Either you get a pass, the test case execution worked, and it was completed, and the function being tested worked as expected. And if you fail, the test case was completed and the function being tested did not perform as expected. Now, of course, it's turtles all the way down. You can have errors in your test program. So you can have an error, maybe the test case was not completed because of some sort of other event or exception occurring, or you've set up the test case incorrectly. Okay, now that we have kind of that big picture overview of JUnit, obviously it won't really make a lot of sense until you start writing these tests yourself or reading them. Let's go ahead and look at those methods in a little bit more depth. So let's just talk about Boolean conditions first. You can assert that a Boolean condition is true or false, assert true and assert false. And you can include a failure message on this. So assert true, whatever the condition is, followed by the message, or assert false, whatever the condition is, followed by the message. Let's look at a couple of examples here. So the first example I have is int result, perform some operation. So I don't know what this method does, but we want it to be greater than 0. So we're going to have a test case, assert true, result greater than 0, which is a Boolean, and we're going to have this message here, result should be positive. On the other hand, let's say we want an assert false. Let's say there's a Boolean and we're going to check some condition, but we actually don't want it to be met. So assert false, condition met, and then we say condition should not be met. Right? So in either case, you can have something that you want to be true or something that you want to be false. Let's just look at a bigger example just to see how everything kind of goes together. As before, I have the @test, public void, and then this test is called test environment 01, and it actually has some input here. And at the very bottom, it's got this assert true, and it has a Boolean condition and has some sort of message that's being printed out that uses the input of some of the variables that are in there. So this is something that's quite a large example, but you can put a lot of things inside your test methods. A new assertion method that we haven't really talked about before But as we start talking about objects, will make a lot more sense is null objects. So we can have assert null and assert not null, which just tells you if an object is null or not. And of course, you can have a failure message associated to it. Some examples, and again, this will make a lot more sense as we start using objects more. But let's say we create an object and we don't want it to be null. That will be the first possible thing, assert not null, and then somehow this object that we have here should not be null. And of course, you can have assert null and just have literally the word null there. Good. The next assertion method I want to talk about is object equality. Basically, you can assert that two objects are equal. And so that's going to be assert equals expected actual. And it's true only when expected dot equals actual. And so something that's really important here is that we're relying on this equals method. And so equals has to be defined in a suitable way. So we've seen this with strings. I'll talk about that more in a second. And of course, we can have a failure message, expected, actual, and message. So let's take a look at this. Here we have assert equals, and then I have two strings, JUnit and JUnit, and they should be equal. You can also try to do JUnit and Java, which are not equal strings, and just say, oh, they should be equal. Well, this is going to make the test mad. You're going to fail it. And so JUnit will tell you that it should be equal. I expected JUnit, but it was Java, right? So it's actually going to point out to you that these are not equal, and it will say what it expected and what was the actual. So those are that is for when you are doing, you want to use assert equals when you're using strings. So let's just take a look at a bigger example. Just how it would look in the code itself. So as you can see, I have this at test. I'm going to test the toString method. So I'm going to create this object called student, and I want to make sure at first, comma last, comma f last, comma first underscore last at ncsu.edu is actually plus this hash pw is actually equal to what the toString method does. So in this case, it's a little bit more complicated than just literally typing in the strings, but this toString method is something that creates a string from an object. So this is just here to show you how you can build things up. So now we also want to see if arrays are equal. And arrays are also objects, but they have a particular kind of structure associated to them. So we have another method called array equals, assert array equals, and expected and actual here are arrays. And basically you want to check that two things are true. That the arrays have the same length, and that at each index possible, that the expected at I is equal to the actual at I. Let's look at some examples. So in the first example, I have int a1, which is equal to 2357, and the second one is int a2, which is equal to 2357. So these are in brackets two int arrays, and I'm going to do assert array equals a1 and a2. And if I go element by element, I'll see 2 equals 2, 3 equals 3, 5 equals 5, and 7 equals 7. They're the same length, and each element is the same, so this will be good. Another thing I'd like to point out is that you can have multidimensional arrays, and you can use assert array equals for multidimensional arrays as well. And so this example will also work out because it's 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11, 13 written out as a 2D array, but all the elements are going to be the same at the same spot. Floating point looks a little bit different. If you have a double, then assert equal requires an additional parameter called delta. And so this assertion will be true if the difference between the expected and actual is less than or equal to this delta value. This is because of floating point precision issues. So if you have something like, for example, double D1 is equal to 100.0 exactly, and D2 is equal to 99.99995, we're going to say D1, D2, and then say how close we want them to be, 0.0001, and we'll say it's going to be equal within delta. And so for our purposes, these two values are close enough. You'll have to decide what you want that delta to be given whatever context you're writing your programs in. Another exception that you'll see is in testing is just the fail assertion, which is literally just to say fail or fail with a message. Basically, this test will always fail if it is executed. And the reason that you might see this is you might see it in code that's unreachable or code that you want to be not reached. But another reason that you might have this is because you are writing some test cases, but you're not quite done yet. And so as a placeholder, you'll leave fail until such time as you're ready to implement those tests. I'm going to point out also exception testing, which is to specify what the accepted exception is. So in this example here, you'll see that I have the fact that it assert throws, and it's specifically got to be an arithmetic exception, and I'm going to try to divide 1 into 0, and it should say that it's going to be an arithmetic exception because you can't divide by 0. We will see exceptions elsewhere in the lessons, but for now, just be aware that you can have tests on exceptions. So the last assert statement that I'd like to talk about in this video is assert timeout preemptively, which is going to take something a little bit different. It takes this thing called duration, and executable and message, and it asserts that the execution of whatever that executable is completes before the given timeout is exceeded. And it's going to fail, of course, with the supplied failure message. All right, so this is a lot of new topics have appeared all at once, so let's look at an example. Here I have a couple of new things that I'm importing. So we've seen Jupyter and assertions and of course scanner, but now we have this java.time.duration. And what this does is says, look, I'm going to do this test and I'm going to allow it to run for 5 seconds, but if it runs more than that, I'm going to have a timeout exceeded. This is really useful if you're writing code that has while loops in it, because if you accidentally hit an infinite loop when you're writing your code, it will actually stop the code instead of running forever, and that way you can go back and fix your infinite loops. So in this video, we've gone over these various assertions. I obviously don't have an exhaustive list here, but the things that are in this video should get you through most of the JUnit testing that you would like to do to get started. And as always, you can check the JUnit documentation for more. Thanks for listening.